All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. We only have 1 hour, and within that 1 hour, I want to take your questions. I know a lot of you have questions about how to speak to others about Islam. I know of this because, in going to the prayer, coming back from the prayer, there's always somebody, asking me a question regarding that topic. So, whereas tonight's topic was slated to be a very different topic about the purification of the soul, I feel that you will hear about that from many of our other shuyukh, either here or in your local masjid, or you might read a book about it. I noticed that there is a book with a title similar to that topic being sold where the talk shop is. So you can always do that on your own. Whereas over the years, in interaction with non-Muslims, there are certain salient points which come to the fore, and I thought I'll share those with you and then take your questions. If you have questions on the topic, you don't have to wait for me to finish what I want to present. As soon as I see questions coming in, I'll stop and I'll deal with the questions, because I feel it is more important to get your questions answered than to tell you what I thought was important, because the questions you have in your minds are probably more important to you than anything else I'm going to try to speak about. Okay, so how do we speak to others about Islam? Many of the people we meet will be atheists, secularists, people who do not believe in God necessarily. So how do you try to explain to them that God exists? Well, human beings have a sense that things are first anything that's to be made is first a mental picture, and then that thing gets put into a prototype in a drawing or something like this, and then eventually it goes into manufacturing. Is it possible that our universe came by in a similar way? First in the mind of God, and then in a written sort of plan, as we speak of al-qada wal-qadr, and then finally the whole thing gets manufactured, the universe booms into existence by the command of God. To me, this is precisely what happened. Now, if we try to look at the alternative is that somebody says, well, no, you don't need God for this. The universe just, you don't need God for this, somebody may say. Is it on? It still says off. Okay, hold on, maybe you keep pressing that. No, now it's definitely off. Okay, I'll try one more time. It says RF mute off. Hello? Yeah? Okay, so I'll keep working with this till we get that sorted out. Though it may not be necessary, because I don't need to move around. But okay, so not to be distracted by that. So, if somebody says, no, you don't need God for this, the universe could have popped into existence by itself. Well, you recently, studies were done in trying to find what people refer to now as the God particle. You know about that study, right? What was the Hadron Collider was dug between some countries in Europe, spanning Switzerland and France, something like this. The objective was to accelerate subatomic particles, and then to have them collide to see what kind of reactions were there at the time of the birth of the universe. Specifically, scientists were expected to find what is referred to as the Higgs boson, a certain subatomic particle that would explain how other particles gathered mass. Now, this is all technical stuff, but in the end, they're saying, okay, we found that Higgs boson, and then they started to call it the God particle. As if there is any such thing as a God particle. There is no such thing, but this is what they called it, and they're saying, okay, now we know how the other particles gathered mass. Well, when they're dealing with particles like this, and they're dealing with the natural laws that explain the interaction between various subatomic particles, they're already dealing with a system which itself requires an explanation. Because a system that has natural laws, that has all of these subatomic particles, is not nothing. So they say, now we know how something could have come from nothing. Well, that's nonsense, because it's not that something came from nothing. This is not nothing. As Dr. Keith Ward of Oxford University explained in his book, God, Chance and Necessity, sometimes people trick themselves into saying nothing and thinking that nothing is referring to a certain sort of something that you can call nothing. You know, the kids sometimes use nothing in this way. You ask a kid, what are you doing? He says, nothing. But he's doing something. He says, nothing. Okay? So they say, now we know how something comes from nothing, but what they're describing as nothing is actually something. So we should ask, how did that something come into existence? They do not have an explanation for that. Now, it does not mean that because we don't have an explanation for something, we should just simply imagine that God is something that explains which we don't have an explanation for. But we should argue that the explanation that God created the universe is a satisfying explanation. And that does not require any further explanation. But all of the other explanations that people are coming up with, whether they say they found the Higgs boson or whatever, those need a further explanation. And we can say, okay, continue your research, but at the end of all of it, we have to return and meet God. So there are good reasons for believing that God exists, and there are no good reasons for believing that God does not exist. How do we speak to people who believe that there are multiple gods? Well, when we look at the organizing nature of the universe, we see that the universe is described as a cosmos as opposed to a chaos. Chaos, everything is dismantled and in confusion. Cosmos, things are organized. We call it a cosmos, not because we would like to think of it as being organized, but because this is how everything appears to us. Earth is orbited by its moon. The Earth and the moon together orbit the sun. Other planets in our solar system orbit the sun. The sun itself pursues its own orbit as part of the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy itself is turning on its own axis. So everything seems to be organized. This is what the Quran says. وَكُلٌّ فِي فَلَكٍ يَسْبَحُونَ. Everything is in its orbit swimming. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created things in an organized way. That points to an organizer. It doesn't point to many gods, it points to one God. Now, when we think about the philosophical arguments for the existence of God, there are several arguments. One of them is what we have just looked at, but we didn't call it by its name. It's the cosmological argument, which says basically that something exists and it requires an explanation, and the explanation for that something that exists is that God created it. You're starting with something and you need an explanation for that something. That argument for the existence of God, which is quite classical and known from the time of the Greek philosophers, is only pointing to one God. It never gives you the idea that there are several gods. The second argument is what is referred to as the teleological argument. That is what is called, in simple terms, the argument from design. The fact that everything appears to be in perfect design. That calls for a designer. But again, it's a designer. It's never several designers. So there is no reason for thinking that there are several gods. And the Quran itself says, had there been several gods, had there been more than one God, then each god would have claimed what it created, and there would have been chaos and confusion between them. Something like you see among the Greek gods in the mythologies. So you have Thor and his brother. What's his brother called? There is Thor, the god of thunder, and then what's his brother? Loki, yeah. So Loki is causing all kinds of havoc, and then Thor has to come in with his hammer and fix things, right? Because Loki is always creating chaos. So that's what happens if you have several gods. But we have only one God who is in total control of everything, and there is no confusion. Okay? So the philosophical arguments for the existence of God do not point to many gods. In fact, there is a scholar known as Occam, based on whose name we come to call a certain principle Occam's razor. Occam's razor basically is the principle that you should not multiply beings beyond necessity. You know, if you lost 20 pounds out of your wallet, then you know that somebody came and took the 20 pounds, right? Well, you don't need to say that several persons came and took the 20 pounds. You only need to think about one person, because one person is sufficient for the job, right? Not a good job, but one person is sufficient. So you don't try to imagine several persons having done just a simple thing like that. Such a wrong thing, but a simple one. So in a similar way, if one God is sufficient for explaining the existence of the entire universe, you don't need to multiply and say, well, okay, maybe several other gods behind him. In fact, there is a further good reason for thinking that there is only one God. Now, if we think about the universe as it exists now as a whole, take the whole thing all together, and suppose we say, okay, well, this universe must have had a cause. So there's a cause of this universe existing. And somebody says, well, wait a minute, if you say that, well, that cause must have had a cause as well. We say, okay, let's play along. So let's say that cause had another cause. And what about that other cause? That must have had a cause too. Okay, let's play along and say, well, that had another cause as well. Well, you can keep going the cause of the cause of the cause of the cause, but eventually there must be one cause which is the cause of everything else. Because if there is no such cause, then you cannot have a whole sequence of causes. There must be one at the end, rather at the beginning, that is the cause of everything else. And once you arrive at that one cause, that is the cause of everything else, the whole sequence, like you have, let's say you have a series of dominoes. One falls on the other, hits the other one, and that hits the other one, and so the whole thing is going all the way to the end. So even if the first domino doesn't fall, then the rest are not going to fall, right? So there has to be a first one that falls. But the first one is not hit by anything else, or by another domino, right? The first one falls and then hits another domino. So, where's the domino that hits the first domino? There is no such thing. In a similar way, if we ask about the first cause, well then, there must be that first cause to begin with, to become the cause of the sequence of causes later on. And that first cause, whatever we're calling the first cause, cannot itself be caused by another cause. Just like the first domino cannot be hit by another domino. Otherwise, if it's hit by another domino, that other domino is the first domino. True? So, if the first cause is caused by another cause, it's the other cause that's really the first cause. Okay? So, when we speak about the first cause, we're really speaking about the uncaused cause. And that's what we're referring to as God. And now, once we know that such a cause must have existed, otherwise nothing else would come into existence, well, that first cause is what we're referring to as God, and that's the only God, and you do not need any of the intermediate causes, because what happens? Once you have that one God, Occam's razor tells you, don't multiply the entities beyond necessity. You don't need the other intermediary cause, because once you have God, who is powerful enough to create everything else, you don't need any intermediary gods. And so, no matter how you look at it, there is only one God.